There's not a week that goes by when I'm on call that I don't have to deal with an odontoid fracture in an older patient. So I think this is something that's very pertinent to all of us. I'm not saying we have any answers, but I'm going to go through some of the data for you. And the real problem is that our population is aging. We already have 40 million Americans over the age of 65, and it is the fastest, it is growing, that segment of the population is growing faster than the rest of the population. The proportion of the population over 60 will be 22% in 2050, and about a third of the population will be over 60 by the end of the century. So there's a real avalanche of the potential odontoid fractures that are out there. Now, the problem is the most common cervical fracture in patients over the age of 70 is this, the type 2 odontoid fracture. And there's an anatomic reason for it. Oftentimes at the base of the dens, you have less cancellous bone, you have thinner cortical bone, and these patients are much more prone to fracturing in the osteoporotic situation right through the base of the dens. And it's something, again, I see every week when I'm on call. Now, the mechanism of injury for the residents is, you'll see the little old lady with the goose egg over one eye. That's a type 2 odontoid fracture when I see that patient until proven otherwise, because it's a hyperextension mechanism about 30 degrees off the midline is what causes these types of fractures. Now, the problem with the way we used to treat this is a patient I took care of with Jens, a guy who's not that old by my consideration now, who had an odontoid fracture, type 2 odontoid fracture. And you can see what we decided to do was put him in a halo. The problem is with the halo is every time we took an x-ray, he was in a different position. And he continued to have persistent neck pain. And we futzed around with him for about a week before we finally decided this wasn't working. It wasn't working for him. And he was in a different position every time he changed position, even in a halo. The other thing is that halos can have a higher mortality associated with halo vest immobilization than other immobilizations for elderly odontoid fractures. And Bob Tajan, who's now also at the University of Utah as a shoulder guy, actually doesn't do spine at all, found that the mortality rate for elderly patients with halo vest immobilization was 42% in a very short period of time, in a less than 3-month follow-up, compared to 21% with other types of immobilization, suggesting to some patients that halo vest immobilization was actually a death sentence in these types of patients. That's been published in the literature as well. So halo vests have kind of become passé, if you will, in treating our older patients. And if you're going to treat somebody with immobilization, we tend to think much more of a collar now than a halo vest. So, one of the problems with the older patients is, do they really not heal as well as we think they do? And this is a study by Lenarson, which was a case-controlled study looking at type 2 odontoid fractures, and found a 21-fold greater risk of a non-union when patients over the age of 50 were treated with halo vest immobilization compared to surgical treatment. And so this led the joint section to actually develop a guideline initially when they were looking at cervical spine injuries, and it was a fairly strong guideline, one of the few guidelines that they could actually come up with, that patients with a type 2 odontoid fracture over the age of 50 should be considered for surgical intervention. Now, the protective effect of surgery has been published in a number of series that have been come out over the last year. Jens has published one that we'll go over, and it's really become overwhelming, the evidence to suggest that you have to treat these patients, particularly the younger, older patient, if you will, those patients in their 60s and 70s, a lot more seriously than we used to. This is a paper from Harvard, and basically they had a retrospective series of 152 patients. The majority were actually treated non-operatively. The mean age in their series was 82. They found that their 3-year post-injury mortality was almost 40%. Now, this paper to me was very sobering because it showed that these are not benign injuries. You got to remember that when you're talking to these patients. They're not benign injuries. You can't just kind of slap in a collar and say, oh, well, come back and see me if there's a problem. I mean, you have to kind of talk to the patient. You have to make them understand what's going on with it. The 3-month and 1-year mortality in this series was lower in the operatively treated group. At 3 months, it was only 11% in the operatively treated group, 25% in the non-operatively treated group. At 1 year, 21% in the operatively treated group versus 36% in the operatively treated group. And the protective effect of surgery was greatest in that, again, younger elderly population, those patients between 65 and 74 in this series. Now, this is a landmark paper from the AO Geriatric Odontoid Fractures Group, and this was an prospective observational study, and Mien's published on 322 patients, and found that the non-operative treatment was associated with a higher 30-day mortality than operative treatment. And at last follow-up, which was over a year and a half, I believe, there was a trend towards greater survival in the operatively treated group. The problem was, of course, you had to understand the complications, that operations were associated with longer stays in the hospital, longer ICU times, and greater needs for a feeding tube. So you have to kind of, have to understand that you can protect the patient from mortality with surgery, but you have to pay the price with increased complication rate. This surgery led to an improved quality of life. This was a subsection of that AO Geriatric Odontoid Fracture study. 159 patients reported on, 101 treated surgically. What they found is that there was worsening of the NDI in the non-surgical arm. In other words, those patients who were not operated on had 15-point worsening of their NDI compared to only a 5-point worsening of the NDI in the surgically treated group, suggesting that not only can you protect the patient from mortality, they also had better outcomes actually from a pain standpoint and a disability standpoint if you operated on them. Interestingly, there was one thing in this paper, and most of these patients were treated with posterior surgery. And what you're going to see is I'm going to talk a little bit about anterior surgery just because I come from Utah and Ron Affelbaum was there and I had to train with him for a long time. So we'll talk about it from a historical standpoint, but there's a real trend, if you will, towards posterior surgery in these patients. And I think, if you're going to operate, that's probably the mechanism that you should take. This was a systematic review of geriatric odontoid fractures that came out of the group from Jefferson. And what they found was that short and long-term mortality favor surgical intervention in these patients, but there was no difference in complications actually when you looked at surgical versus non-surgical treatment of these patients. Now, we're talking about surgery, so, really the best method to achieve fixation remains open to debate, though I kind of given you tip my hand in terms of my preference for posterior surgery. There is a slight still trend, if you will, to talk about anterior surgery because there are some potential benefits of direct anterior fixation. You can preserve the C1-2 joint, shorter surgical times, lower risk to vertebral artery, and you don't have to position the patient prone. But there's a lot of complications when you do this in the older patient, and we'll go over that. So I think this is a great mechanism, an anterior odontoid screw, for treating a type 2 odontoid fracture in a 25-year-old, but how often do you see that? Almost never. So, it really becomes sort of almost a moot point, I think, now as we talk about fixation for these patients. I talked to you about, Ron's big series, and he developed, he's a master technician when it comes to this. I mean, he thought this was a simple procedure, but I'll tell you, he paid so much attention to detail when he used to do these things that he could achieve a 90% bony fusion rate in recent fractures who had type 2 odontoid fractures. The problem is the rest of us can't. The one thing he found in his series was this was associated with non-union, this anterior oblique positioning that you can see all the way over on the left side there. Fortunately, it's a rarer pattern of odontoid fracture, but not sex, not age, not degree of displacement, not number of screws predicted non-union or failure to fuse, but it was that anterior oblique orientation of the fracture. We looked at just our elderly patients, and we published this about 8 or 10 years ago now, and had 57 patients over the age of 70 who had odontoid screws. We actually were able to follow up 42 of them. We lost a lot of them to follow-up after before the first 3 months, and found that our stability rate, which was described as either bony fusion or fibrous union, was 81% in this group. And that kind of corresponds with what's out there in the literature, where you see from Platzer a 12% non-union rate in the elderly. So you can get an 80 to 90% fusion rate if you use an odontoid screw. The one thing we found in our studies that we had higher fusion rates when we used 2 screws. And oftentimes what we try to do is go to great lengths, if you will. You can see the overlapping screws here to try to get 2 screws into our elderly patients. But the problem was we had a lot of dysphagia in these patients. And anybody who's done anterior cervical surgery in an older patient understands this is something you have to talk to them about. I mean, just doing a C3-4 ACD for myelopathy is a problem in somebody who's the age of 78. So we found that we had a 35% incidence of dysphagia, and 20% of these patients actually needed a feeding tube, sometimes for a couple of months after these odontoid fractures. That's been repeated out there in the literature. This is a series from Brown looking at 30 cases. They had almost a 50% need for some sort of gastroscopy tube after an anterior odontoid screw, and they found the majority of those patients were patients over the age of 75, as you can see right here, suggesting again those older odontoid fractures. This is a bad problem if you do an odontoid screw. You got to talk to these patients about, non-union, and you got to talk to them about dysphagia. So what's become much more popular, as I mentioned, posterior fixation for these patients. And this is a fellow that we took care of here at Harborview a number of years ago who's actually very active, still out hunting and everything else. He was in his late 70s, and we thought he was much better treated with a posterior fixation as opposed to an anterior fixation. Now, what's out there in the literature? Well, there's not really a direct comparison of techniques, but there are a number of case series that have now been published suggesting good fusion rates for a posterior fixation, a posterior C1-2 fixation, even in older patients. Anderson published now over 15 years ago in the European Spine Journal, 100% fusion rates in patients who were treated posteriorly with odontoid fractures. A lot of the anterior patients actually failed their fixation. Franzen looked at 27 patients. Even though he had a 22% mortality at 1 year, they found that the healing rate in those patients who survived, the 21 patients who survived to a year, was over 95%, suggesting with posterior fixation, you can really get a good fusion rate, a good healing rate, over 90% in most of these patients. Other papers that are out there, Bob Molinari looked at 26 patients. If he had a fracture that was displaced more than 5 millimeters, he tended to recommend the patient for a posterior C1-2 fusion. He found his 1 year mortality was probably better than what's out there for the conservatively treated group, less than 20%. There were significant major complications. And even though a lot of the fractures didn't heal themselves, these patients actually did relatively well. Their NDIs and their VAS were comparable with an age-matched cohort. Okay, so that you can treat these patients with a posterior C1-2 fusion, but you're not setting them up for a lot of pain and a lot of disability. This is actually a recent series that is from Shock Trauma, and it's Dan Gelb's group, and what he looked at was 43 patients that were treated with posterior C1-2 fixation. And again, these are patients over the age of 80, and in his protocol, patients who had more than 5 millimeters of displacement, again, he's subjected to a posterior C1-2 fusion. He found his 30-day mortality and his 1 year mortality were acceptably low. What they did actually find, even with the posterior group, that you had a pretty high dysphagia rate, still 27%, and that if you got dysphagia, there was a much greater chance of mortality in this group. So, even a posterior approach doesn't completely protect you from dysphagia in this elderly odontoid fracture population. So what's out there? Which approach? This is, again, that systematic review from Jefferson. There's really no difference or mortality when you compare an anterior versus a posterior approach, but there is a trend towards a higher fusion and a higher healing rate in posterior fixation when you look at all the literature in combination. So, the last thing we're going to follow up with here is what about those patients who are now really old? Okay, you're getting into your late 80s and your 90s and you're still, trying to be active and you fall down and you have an odontoid fracture. This is a lady who is a matriarch of the Salt Lake Valley. I've had more phone calls about this patient than all my other patients combined in 20 years of practice. She had a ground level fall and had this type 2 odontoid fracture and absolutely refused intervention. Said I was absolutely insane to recommend that she had surgery. She thought I was the biggest idiot she'd ever met. And so she said, no, not going to have it. So we kept her in a collar for a period of time. Is that a reasonable treatment for somebody with an odontoid fracture? Well, what's out there in the literature? Now, this is, again, the first paper is a paper from the group at Jefferson. And what they found that was 5% of their patients who presented with type 2 odontoid fractures had chronic fractures with a neurologic deficit. So this is kind of an alarmist paper suggesting that these patients can get into trouble, certainly if you treat them with benign neglect, and that can be a real problem. Bob Hart, though, about 15 years ago, published a paper where he followed 5 patients with non-unions and followed them all for 5 years. None of those patients developed myelopathy, suggesting the other end of the spectrum, maybe these patients don't get into so much trouble. So really, where does the answer lie here? Well, it's hard to tell from the literature. What we do know is that you can successfully treat patients with a collar, particularly those older patients. Now, this is, again, Bob Molinari, who published this in Global Spine Journal, and he said, again, if you had less than a 5 millimeter displacement of your dens, I'm going to put you in a collar for 6 months. He only found that you only had a 6% healing rate, but these patients had actually a pretty good health-related quality of life measures and a lower mortality complication rate in this non-operative group than they did in those operative patients. And his conclusion was that the results of his study did not demonstrate any evidence for a lower functional outcome in patients who had a mobile odontoid non-union, suggesting again that maybe it's not not benign neglect to manage somebody in a collar, particularly your ultra, if you will, your ultra elderly in this population. Finally, this is a group from the Mayo Clinic, or a paper from the Mayo Clinic, and what they had is 111 patients who were over the age of 80. Most of these were treated non-operatively. What they found was this is not a benign disease. You can see the mortality rates there go up to 41% at 1 year. But there was nearly no difference in this patient population between the operative and the non-operative groups. Poorer outcomes were associated with spinal cord injury, higher injury severity scores, decreased Glasgow-Coma scale. And their conclusion was type 2 odontoid fractures are highly morbid and surgery should be approached with trepidation, suggesting maybe in that, again, ultra-elderly population, surgery doesn't have the protective effect that it does in 60 and 70-year-olds. So in conclusion, that lady that I talked to you about, she's now actually 4 years out from her fracture. She's in her 90s. She has no neck pain, still out there hiking, doing the things she wants to do. I think she's got a non-union of her odontoid here. It's probably a fibrous non-union because she doesn't seem to have that much pain when you examine her, but she's doing just well. And she was right, and I was wrong, that I thought, surgery may have made the x-ray look better, but it probably wouldn't have made her any better. The problem is, not all elderly are the same. And again, that's the patient who is an active hunter. He's back out. He was back out hunting and so forth, I know, within a year of his injury. So basically, odontoid fractures, they're increasing in frequency. Certainly, every time I'm on call, you see one. I tend to recommend surgery, particularly in somebody who is a younger, older patient, and particularly somebody who is, in Utah skiing at Alta still. I'd probably go posteriorly most of the time. The caveat to that would be if one of us in the front row came in with an odontoid fracture, I might try to talk into an odontoid screw. But I think close follow-up with a collar might be an alternative, particularly in our patients who are in their late 80s or 90s. And this may be a reasonable alternative for our frailer patients. So thanks for your attention.
Thanks.